Welcome, everyone, to CIMM Sessions. I'm David Lloyd, the Director for the Center for Innovation in Ministry and Mission through Graceland University and the Community of Christ Seminary. Tonight, again, we're in our second part of a series. For those of you who are involved in reunion or not involved in reunion and wanted to participate in the adult class, this is our preview of that class. We are sharing the 2024 reunion materials entitled Heal the Earth, Restoration Imperative. And Rick Bunch is our presenter for tonight and for the next 2 weeks afterward. And we're really pleased to have him from Fort Collins, Colorado, and sharing with us in this area. Tonight, we're going to take a few questions during the we're going to have some interaction for the first time during this session. So Rick might ask a few questions, and if you feel comfortable in unmuting at that time to ask a question, we'll let you know. If not, you can put questions at any time in the chat feature of the room and be able to ask your question there. I'm also going to right now post in the not in the waiting room, to everyone in the meeting on the chat the link to download the reunion materials on the Herald House site. This is a PDF, and if you haven't done that from the last meeting, we encourage you to do that, and you can follow through. We are going into Chapter 2 this week. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Rick and have him introduce himself again to the group, and we'll get started.
Well, hello again. It's nice to be with you. I do appreciate this opportunity. Given the number of people I'm seeing on the screen, it's almost scary to think that I have an audience this large and I'm taking up all of your time at this point. A couple of housekeeping things. After the session last time, it was called to my attention that I left off part of my resume, so I need to catch up with that. It happens that I was university professor and department chairman for several years, and in the middle of that sojourn, I accepted a contractual assignment to French Polynesia on a leadership development project. After some years then, I was accepted for World Church appointment, and my first assignment was to Graceland College, at the time, university of course now. And so I was the campus minister for 10 years. It's the best job I've ever had. After Graceland, I was in the North Central region and then assigned to Tulsa, Oklahoma as Tulsa State President. And my last assignment was to Washington, D.C., where I managed to help create the Chesapeake Bay Mission Center. And I was president until I retired then, having been in Washington, D.C. for a little over 12 years. And I retired to Fort Collins in 2006. As David mentioned, we're going to deviate a little bit from the norm and pause a couple times to engage in chats. I've had a long-held definition of education that education is putting people into situations from which there's no escape except by thinking. And so I hope that works for us tonight to give you a chance to do a bit of thinking. So the second lesson is entitled Immersed in Creation, and the lesson explores the availability of Earth's clean, fresh water for human consumption and sanitation, and how it relates to climate and population and distribution. The water cycle underscores the link between clean water availability and the health of Earth's oceans, addressing the need for water and lacks simple answers, as water issues vary globally by vocation. And so what that means in Northern Africa, for example, may be completely different than water availability in South Australia. We enter into a time of learning and sharing the practice of dwelling in the Word. So rest in a moment of silence, if you would. Quiet your thoughts and center in God's presence of peace. We'll share the scripture from Doctrine and Covenants 163, paragraph 4c. Let the educational and community development endeavors of the church equip people of all ages to carry the ethics of Christ's peace into all arenas of life. Prepare new generations of disciples to bring fresh vision to bear on the perplexing problems of poverty, disease, war, and environmental deterioration. Their contributions will be multiplied if their hearts are focused on God's will for creation. Water is life. A looming crisis affects us all, the crisis of water. Water, the essence of life, connects every living form on earth through shared needs for air, water, and nutrition. The water cycle is a fundamental aspect of Earth, with water existing as liquid, ice, and gas-like clouds and humidity. While the volume of water on Earth remains constant, its access is subject to change. The crisis intertwines water availability and climate change. Water scarcity stands as a significant contributor, exacerbated by extreme weather events that render water scarcer, more unpredictable, or more polluted. Contributing factors include population growth, urbanization, climate change, pollution, and inefficient water management practices. Disasters can destroy or contaminate entire water supplies, heightening the vulnerability of children and susceptible populations to disease like cholera and typhoid. It happens that climatologists and tropical weather scientists are predicting a rather chaotic future this year. This year's forecasts predict at least 23 named storms in the Atlantic Ocean. The prediction of 11 storms that will become hurricanes is higher than our 30-year average of 7.2. And a very warm Atlantic favors an above-average season since a hurricane is fueled by the source of warm ocean water. So we have that to look forward to. Over the past 2 decades, terrestrial water storage, including soil moisture, snow, and ice, has declined alarmingly because of complex factors related to varied global weather patterns. Over a fifth of the world's basins recently have experienced rapid increases in their surface water area, growth in reservoirs and newly flooded land, or rapid decline in surface water area, the drying up of lakes, reservoirs, and wetlands, rivers, floodplains, and seasonal rain patterns. And a good example of what's happening, at least here in the United States, is the fact that in the Colorado River Basin, the large reservoirs, the large lakes, Lake Powell, Lake Mead, are actually drying up. And it's almost scary to think of what the future is going to hold if we don't get more water in those areas. And even the mighty Mississippi River is experiencing periods of drought that has, it's actually affected the barge traffic up and down the river. So it is becoming a real problem. And despite the fact that over 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by water, access to fresh water for drinking and sanitation emerges as a critical global challenge. Fresh water, constituting only about 2.5% of Earth's water, and a mere 0.5% being accessible for human use, underscores the scarcity. While the United Nations declares water a human right freely accessible to all, global markets often treat it as a commodity, and in many regions, the expectations of turning on a faucet for water contrast sharply with the reality of those who must travel long distances to draw marginally clean water or contend with waterborne diseases. Climate change predictions by Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change highlight increasing water-related disasters disproportionately affecting the world's poorest. The Intergovernmental Panel predicts increasing natural disasters, many related to water, and the world's poorest, who have contributed very little to greenhouse gas emissions, are affected most. There is a risk that low-income countries may be pushed into a vicious cycle of worsening poverty if they cannot recover from one disaster before the next one occurs. Contaminated water not only poses health risks, but fuels competition and conflicts in areas with limited water resources. Ethical, equitable, and just considerations arise, especially in regions where large corporations control water supplies and sell bottled water to those lacking resources to purchase it in the first place. This practice exacerbates environmental problems with plastic container disposal. It is crucial to address these interconnected issues with a holistic understanding of water's vital role in sustaining life. And this plastic business is a further problem because of the huge plastic islands called gyres that are existent in our oceans. And the plastic island between California and Hawaii is now 2 times the size of Texas, if you can begin to imagine that. You might, in your personal considerations there, explore personal habits and behavior related to water consumption and think about how can we cultivate responsibility and mindfulness in our use of water. And that has come home to me at least 3 times in my life and I grew up in Springfield, Missouri. And when I was in high school, we experienced a drought that completely dried up our water system. When we were living in Lamoni, during the years of when I was campus minister, our water supply completely dried up there in Lamoni, and we had to go back to the 1958-59 years when they depended on wells for water there in Lamoni. And interestingly enough, the third time was when we were living in Tahiti. Normally you think of a rainy season there, and the second year we were there, we had no rainy season, and so we had to get back to carrying water out from the city, out from Papeete, so that we would have water to shower and water to cook with. And so these climate issues can happen worldwide, and they certainly are depressing in many respects. Climate change has significant repercussions on water availability, manifesting in extreme water events such as hurricanes and typhoons, which inundate some regions with vast amounts of water. And that leaves millions of people without access to clean water for drinking, cooking, and sanitation. Simultaneously, other areas grapple with devastating droughts that efficiently dry up water sources, as we mentioned, leaving millions facing the challenge of survival without this essential resource. It happens that as climate experiences warming, and particularly in the oceans, which absorb a lot of the carbon dioxide, that as water warms, it expands. And consequently, there are many areas in our world that are being inundated now, and they're losing their shorelines and so forth. And this happens to be a picture in one of the atolls in Rangiroa, in French Polynesia, that they are now losing a lot of their shoreline, and and they're only about 10 feet out of the ocean anyway. And so this has become an extreme problem for French Polynesia and many countries that have vast shorelines that are now becoming inundated. So the issue is compounded by the rapid melting of ice from glaciers and ice shelves, contributing water to oceans and seas. This process not only alters ocean temperatures, but leads to rising sea levels, inundating low-lying landforms and contaminating groundwater, crucial for human consumption. The scientific consensus and heightened government awareness underscore the disastrous impacts of global warming on the water cycle and ocean temperatures. Global warming, characterized by the gradual increase of Earth's atmospheric temperature, results from the trapping of an increased amount of the sun's energy. This trapped heat is distributed globally through wind and ocean movement. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration highlights the role of ocean currents as conveyor belts, transporting heat toward polar regions and influencing both weather patterns and our overall climate. And it also relates to the Earth's soils. Earth's most crucial carbon sinks are its oceans, wetlands, and forests, as well as the soil composition on Earth. Maintaining resilient landscapes with a balanced water cycle is imperative to prevent hazardous temperature increases. Ensuring everyone's safety involves protecting ecosystems and incorporating nature-based solutions into human population planning. Preserving forests and wetlands, for instance, serves multiple purposes, including carbon storage, groundwater recharge, and acting as a buffer against storms. Moreover, the sun's rays impact Earth's surface profoundly, influencing weather and climate through various mechanisms. Heat represents energy, and the addition of energy to any system induces changes. Within our climate system, elements such as sea surface temperature, precipitation, ocean currents, air pressure, and winds interact. The global climate, as a comprehensive system, integrates these diverse factors. Oceans assume a pivotal role in climate dynamics by absorbing approximately 90% of the heat stored in Earth's atmosphere and a quarter of the carbon dioxide emitted from fossil fuels. An illustration of how heat becomes a decisive factor is evident when surface water at the equator in the Pacific Ocean becomes warmer than usual, and that's accompanied by weaker than normal east winds. The phenomenon is referred to as El Nino. Conversely, when the water is cooler and the east winds are stronger, the condition is known as La Nina. El Nino typically is associated with heightened rainfall and at times destructive flooding. La Nina tends to be linked to drier weather conditions. The interplay between the ocean and the atmosphere can modify weather patterns globally, causing severe storms or mild weather, droughts, or flooding. Shifts in temperature further influence the large wind patterns responsible for phenomena like Asian monsoons, as well as the distribution of rain and snow worldwide, contributing to increased prevalence of droughts and unpredictable weather. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency indicates that global climate changes may involve rising temperatures in the Pacific Ocean, intensifying typhoons, and leading them to exert stronger winds, increased rainfall, and more substantial damage. Similar circumstances in the Atlantic Ocean may contribute to a rise in the number and severity of hurricanes. The ripple effect extend to beyond weather impacts, affecting food supplies, pricing, and forest fires, subsequently influencing economies and shaping political responses. And we've already referred to the fact that climatologists are expecting at least 11 named hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean this hurricane season. Continuously growing population intensifies the demand for water, even where it is available, leading to increased pressure on existing supplies. Agricultural practices and mineral extraction contribute to the depletion of water tables. Moreover, quantity of clean and drinkable water may be diminishing because of pollution. Globally, an estimated 2 million tons of sewage and industrial and agricultural waste are discharged into the waterways annually. Urbanization and the prevalence of impervious surfaces result in heightened runoff, and those impervious surfaces would be things like parking lots and roadways as we continue to cover up the soil surface with asphalt and concrete. As population numbers surge, demands rise, and supplies dwindle, a dangerous equation emerges. It is imperative to safeguard oceans and estuaries not only from global warming caused by carbon and methane emissions, but from chemical contamination resulted from farm chemicals, pesticides, and plastics. While science and innovation contribute to solutions for these critical issues, global collaboration is essential to bring meaningful change. In the best interest of humanity, responsible stewardship must guide our consumption of water. Mother Earth has bestowed abundance upon us through her creation, and it is our collective responsibility to avoid over-exploiting these precious resources. And it certainly would help to clean it up in the first place and then not contribute to the crises along with that. And so I'd like to pause now and to get your response and your reflection. So the question, how does the interconnectedness of water availability, climate change, and global factors such as drought, hurricanes, and melting of ice impact the vulnerability of marginalized communities, particularly low-income countries? So if we want to take the chat open at this point, what are your ideas? What are your responses? Is it really a problem where you live? And how might we solve some of the problems globally with our ideas that come from this?
I just learned that tending my house for termites is 10 times the impact, that I ever understood. That particular gas is even worse than methane. So next termite treatment's got to be another consideration for tenting. And secondly, this bagging of my wet garbage, I accumulated. I put out 20 pounds of wet garbage that we're isolating now as opposed to burying, making more methane. So on a personal note, that's two quick things that have come to mind to consider.
In our country, where would you consider to be vulnerable populations that might be affected by weather and access to water?
Desert Native American cultures are probably most vulnerable in my mind because they don't have the resources or the locations to be able to.
I think a really good example is in southern Louisiana, and particularly around New Orleans, that there are populations there that some of them are actually below sea level, and with the warming of weather, it's pushing the Gulf of Mexico back up into the estuaries there and into some of those low-lying areas. And so there are a number of those populations that are losing their housing literally. And so I think this would be a good example of what I'm talking about with those vulnerable populations that suffer most from what's happening with our climate now.
Our area has been affected quite a bit by drought that we're not used to. And we have a town of about 4,000 just 17 miles south of me that had no water for like 3 months last summer and was having to have it pumped in and filling their water tower so they could, have a very spare amount of water. And then on that's southeast Kansas, and then in northeast Oklahoma, that just right on down the highway, Bartlesville, they were being affected close to the same way, just because the rivers are drying up. A lot of our ponds are drying up, and so that effect, right in the middle, the heartland of the United States, it was very much in a severe drought. We were in our area alone, our county was listed as the highest drought area in the United States in our county. And so we're hoping for a little more water this year.
Well, and I'm looking at John Weiss there and his eclipse picture. What happens when when an event like this happens and these little towns and these cities and so forth are inundated with thousands and thousands of people all at once, and the kind of pressure that might put on water supply and even sanitation at that point.
Mexico City, I think CNN reported today, Mexico City is running out of water, and they think, 0 day could be within the next month. And that's a town of 22 million people.
Sure.
So when you have that many people running out of water, the other really interesting thing is fracking. Fracking consumes a ridiculously huge amount of fresh water and then spits out pollution that is toxic. So they say a well can be anywhere from 1.5 million gallons up to 16 million, depending on that's a lot of water.
Well, it's interesting too that the big oil companies here in Colorado are spending millions of dollars with propaganda that they put on our TV screen every night during the news of how they're not using the water, and they're either that or they're putting it back into the water table. And, that's, I don't know where you stand in terms of oil production, but for me, that's just not true, because when you look at the Poudre River flowing through Fort Collins, and then it goes into Weld County east of us, and then you look at the river on east of Greeley, that that water is just not there. And so to me, and I'm assuming that it's going into the fracking. Well, what are the future implications with all of this? The subject of climate change and global warming elicits diverse reactions among individuals. Some fear the fate of the world. Others experience confusion, questions, or frustrations in navigating through the abundance of information to discern fact from fiction and determine the most appropriate responses. And what I just stated in follow-up with David's, or whoever it was, said a lot of usage of water goes to fracking. That's a good example of what we're talking about here. So in the face of these complex and sometimes perplexing issues, it's crucial not to avoid difficult conversations. Instead, discussions should foster better understanding and seek common consent on how, as faithful stewards of Earth, we can collaborate and address the challenges together. According to experts, the repercussions of climate change still can be managed if we adopt more substantial emission reductions and implement policies to enhance societal resilience. Numerous water-related solutions offer the opportunity to address both goals simultaneously. They merit careful consideration. Examples of such solutions include safeguarding forests, incorporating wetlands into urban areas, and investing in wastewater treatment, providing a diverse range of possibilities. Keeping these considerations in mind, we can lower the emissions curve and enhance resilience in manners that concurrently narrow the gap between the rich and the poor. The call is to be on the forefront. That refers to Doctrine and Covenants, section 150, paragraph 7, urges us to explore, endorse, and actively express our faith. Through a comprehensive approach to the water crisis and the advocacy of sustainable waterable management, it becomes feasible to alleviate impacts and guarantee access to clean and safe water for everyone. Science assists us in comprehending the properties of water and its role in the natural world, and ethics guide our decisions on how to conserve, safeguard, and distribute Earth's water resources. Theology deepens our understanding of our discipleship call to be faithful stewards on Earth. What this amounts to is a desalinization and a treatment process, which could be one of those solutions for at least some people, and primarily in like island countries where fresh water is difficult to come by in the first place. But we have to realize too that in this desalinization process, it uses a lot of energy. And so there are trade-offs there then. We can get fresh water. And by the way, I was on the island of St. Martin's some years ago, and that fresh water may be fresh water, but it has a taste that we're certainly not used to. But anyway, the process, it goes into the pre-treatment and then reverse osmosis, and then post-treatment, stabilizing the pH level, and then it comes into the tank where it becomes fresh water. Water has held enduring significance as a sacred symbol, a symbol of purification and healing, cleansing, and the very wellspring of life. And I'm sorry, I thought I had a picture there. It disappeared somehow or another, of baptism as one of those symbolic important events. And it's evident in sacramental rites, including baptism and ritual bathing in various faith traditions. Consequently, it's imperative that we approach water with a sense of reverence, recognizing its essential role in sustaining habitat and fostering life. The provision of clean water becomes a sacred trust, a responsibility to be shared for the well-being of all people and all creation. Engaging climate issues becomes a tangible expression of our faith and a commitment to justice and a demonstration of solidarity with the most vulnerable around the world, ensuring universal access to clean and drinkable water. Initiatives for water justice are essential, addressing issues related to accessibility, droughts, pollution, rising tides, and flooding. As stewards on Earth, our focus on water justice becomes integral to fostering peace. Recognizing the interconnectedness of water justice and poverty, we are called to act, striving to make this life-sustaining resource accessible to all of Earth's inhabitants. In the spirit of civil rights leader Martin Luther King, we echo the sentiment that we will not be satisfied until justice flows like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Addressing water crisis necessitates a multifaceted approach, ways people can express their faith in action. We need to advocate with climate policymakers to prioritize water in action plans, emphasizing enhanced conservation and efficiency. And this involves reducing water waste and promoting water efficient practices in industry and households. Sustainable water management contributes to societal adaptation to climate change by fostering resilience, safeguarding health, and preserving lives. Additionally, it mitigates climate change by protecting ecosystems and reducing carbon emissions from water and sanitation transportation. And what we have here is an irrigation ditch, and you can imagine what happens as that water flows through that ditch, the amount of evaporation that occurs and soaking into the soil. And so while we are putting that water out into areas that it's needed for agriculture, we simply waste a lot of the water. And even if it's put into a concrete ditch, as it were, there's still that evaporation factor. And so we need to be mindful of uses such as this and how much water we waste in the process. We need to encourage government leaders at all levels to collaborate across regional and national borders. The aim for a balance in water distribution among communities, industry, agriculture, and ecosystems, addressing transboundary water issues, sharing best practices, and assisting regions facing severe water scarcity. Advocate for city governments and water authorities to replace lead pipes and eliminate per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, which in PFAS, from water supplies. Consider implementing in-home action such as reverse osmosis filters as hidden culprits, and approximately half of U.S. drinking water are lead and PFAS commonly known as forever chemicals. We need to support initiatives that enhance carbon storage. Peatlands, for example, store at least twice as much water and twice as much carbon as all of Earth's forests, and mangrove soils can store up to 3 times more carbon than terrestrial soils. We need to develop strategies to develop and adapt impacts of climate change, implement water harvesting. Those techniques, such as enhancing storage capacities and improving drought and flood management, or small-scale endeavors such as desalination of ocean water in isolated areas such as island nations. We need to protect the natural buffers. Coastal mangroves and wetlands are effective and inexpensive natural barriers. Those barriers to flooding and extreme weather events and erosion, as the vegetation helps regulate water flow and binds the soil in floodplains, riverbanks, and coastlines. And in some cases, it's a small matter, but harvesting rainwater, we can include these vats in our homes that as rainwater comes down the pipes, we can put it into these vats, but we need also to remember to cover it, because then we eliminate the presence of mosquitoes that can proliferate in areas where mosquitoes are prominent. So this is at home. Another possibility at home would be these vats that have electric pumps then that can pump fresh water into our households. And then it's possible to harvest rainwater in a much larger scale. And so the rainwater comes down into the vat and is stored and then pumped back into areas that refresh it, and then it's available for home use in small scales, as it were. But I'm also thinking of the atolls, and fresh water by and large comes from rainwater exclusively, and so they have above ground storage, which really amounts to just a room that the rainwater can go down into the storage area, and then they have faucets that they can take it out and either boil it or use it for sanitation purposes and so forth. But we need to adapt climate smart agriculture also. Use conservation techniques to improve organic matter by increasing soil moisture and that retention of that moisture, and then dripping irrigation and reducing post-harvest losses and food waste. We need to reuse wastewater. Unconventional water resources, such as regulated treated wastewater, can be used for irrigation and industrial use and municipal purposes. And I assume that some of you, like myself, are golfers, and you look at all these golf courses in areas where water may be scarce, but that's an area where they can be use of the wastewater, gray water as it's called, for irrigation purposes. And then preserve groundwater. Exploring, protecting, and sustaining the use of groundwater is central in adapting to climate change and meeting the needs of a growing population. So we can pause again. Another question for consideration. Consider the connection between engaging with climate issues and expressing your faith. How does advocating for water justice align your commitment to justice and solidarity with vulnerable communities worldwide. I think in terms of your congregations or your mission centers there, what is the connection between engaging climate issues with expressing your faith? Is it just one of those issues that it's not spiritual, so we don't have to worry about it? But then when you consider how water is used for sacred purposes, there may be a connection at that point. Are there ways that your congregations and your reunion grounds and your even households can consider the interconnectedness between water use and climate change? And how can you ensure that you're using the water properly in each of those locations and each of those facilities? And a rather extreme idea, I'm thinking of when we were living in Lamoni, that when our water supply dried up, we actually made a commitment and a legal document that allowed for the pipeline coming from Des Moines and running down through Lamoni, the Williams Oil Company, that they scrubbed that pipeline, and we were actually able to get water from Des Moines that was piped into our reservoirs then, so that we were able to get water again that could be treated. But in the process, when we would take a shower, we would put a bucket down between our legs, and we would collect whatever water we could from the shower and then use that to flush our toilets. So there's just examples of the kinds of things that you may need to do in a stressful situation. But what, let's see.
We've
Well,
got some people I think are ready to share. Go ahead, Debbie.
I was going to say that just being aware that when you brush it's stuff we've taught. I'm a teacher, and so it's stuff we've taught in our elementary schools. You turn the water off when you brush your teeth, and then turn it back on, or just being aware of the waste of water. I have an ice machine here, and I have kids that come up there and fill their cup full of ice, take a drink, and then dump the ice in the water. And so such small waste, but overall it's big waste. I remember a project we did for a science class where we collected trash in our households for I think a day, and the kids were astounded at the amount of waste that they have in their own personal lives. Our cafeterias in our schools, the amount of waste that goes on in our cafeterias is phenomenal. The waste of food, the waste of, it's cringy. It's just cringy to watch it all happen.
Another way that you might consider this is for your reunion grounds and all of your shower rooms, of insisting that people, when they take a shower, get wet and soap down and put the shampoo in their head, and then turn off the water while you're washing, and then turn the water back on in order to rinse. And I mentioned our situation in Lamoni some years ago. In August was spectacular there, and we had 1,000 high school kids plus staff there, and that became a major issue because in the heat of competition and so forth, everybody needed a shower, and so we had to kind of regulate that, and hopefully the delegation leaders were able to convince their young people to use that mechanism to preserve some of our water. Incidentally, another anecdote, we didn't open our swimming pool in the park that summer, and the town of Leon, up the road 10 miles, they were willing to give us water to fill our swimming pool. but we thought that would not be a good example to our people, so we just kept the swimming pool closed.
So I think we've had a number of people also on the chat bring up some points. Dennis talked about 7% of water diversion for farming is allocated to produce hay for beef cattle, and this is the Colorado River system percentage. And again, it goes into so many different areas, doesn't it? And I really can see how at a reunion, if your campground has a lake or by a body of water, how this class would work really well in that kind of an environment as we're talking about the usage. And also to talk to your reunion about what could we do even this week to be aware of our water usage and to be better stewards with it. So putting it in practice while you're out there is important. And Bill and Linda say per ounce of protein meat production requires up to 6 times the water for legume protein. So a number of these, another comment from Bill and Linda earlier is that lower income communities in our state in North Carolina are much more prone to flooding from hurricanes and often live in flooded plains. That there's also a social justice issue here too, is that the people who have the money usually have the access to the better water and or protection from water. So these are all really important parts of this. And we have gone past our time tonight. Rick, did you have anything you want to sum up in closing?
Yes, I wanted to read again that section from the Doctrine and Covenants, so I'll just do it very briefly and quickly. Let the educational and community development endeavors of the church equip people of all ages to carry the ethics of Christ's peace into all arenas of life, prepare new generations of disciples to bring fresh vision to bear on the perplexing problems of poverty, disease, war, and environmental deterioration. Their contributions will be multiplied if their hearts are focused on God's will for creation. And the thing I'd like to emphasize out of that is we need to bring our young people into all of our discussions with reference to water and its significance to life on earth and how we might conserve and preserve it as we go along. So that's the last thing I had in mind.
Thank you very much, Rick. By the way, our snack for tonight, I stopped by the canteen at Reunion and picked up some Sun Chips out of a bag. We used a large bag to serve multiple people rather than the small bags for one person. So at least we're getting that island a little bit smaller. And these are things we can talk about at Reunion too, is how do we take down our footprint now and how do we make a commitment about that once we get home? Rick, thank you very much. Rick will join us again next week for part 3 of this experience together, and I hope you'll join us then. Again, look on our website at www.graceland.edu/CIMM sessions to see our schedule of other upcoming times together. Thank you again for joining us this evening. Have a good evening. Take care.